Khalil Gibran once said, "Out of suffering have emerged the strongest souls. The most massive characters are seared with scars." The Vulnerable Power Show is a deep dive into the heart of leadership. Hear raw insights and wisdom from experienced leaders who transformed during their dark night of the soul journey, now bringing light to the world. Spotlighting heart-centered leaders that have transformed, stepping into their fullest light and mission. Learn how you, too, can weather life's storm and thrive. What are the keys for successful personal growth and life-changing transformation? It is my intention to bring you wisdom, empowerment, hope, and inspiration, so you too can ascend to your fullest light as a leader, to bring about impact for the collective good. Hello, and greetings, everybody. Welcome back to another special episode of the Vulnerable Power Show. Today, we're rounding out an inspired 3-part series with a beloved soul sister and very, very gifted world-famous healer, Tanja Seagraves, everybody.
Hi, everybody. Yay.
The crowd goes wild. So if you haven't already watched the preceding episodes, now's a good time to hit pause, go back in the YouTube channel and watch what we'll call episode 1, which is actually, I believe, episode 4 of the Vulnerable Power Show, where Tanja unpacks her story. Then the second episode, which we'll refer to in this episode as episode 2, is the following episode where Tanja came back and we talked about vulnerability for healing and the power of vulnerability in healing. So today, our theme is about being an empath or empath empowerment. There's a lot of talk about sensitivity and weakness, and Tanja, quite candidly, was a part of a group. And if it's okay, I'm going to share overarchingly the things that come up to set our premise for today of questions oftentimes asked. Why does being an empath come with health issues? How do I live in a medically sensitive and compromised body? How do I get out of and stay away from abusive relationships? Why don't people hear me or see me as an empath? How do I know what I'm feeling is mine or others? How can I shield or protect better? So most of these questions, and the theme for today is really turning this on its head and showing how literally the whole framework of how we view being an empath, or calling it sensitivity per se, puts people in a victim position. And really today we wanted to talk about how vulnerability is actually power, how instead of sensitivity, it's a strength per se. And before we dive in and we actually get into it a little bit more, I wanted to premise with a piece of research that I talk about in some of the presentations and some of the topics I talk about, and Tanja doesn't necessarily talk about it this way. So I wanted to talk about Dr. Aron, A-R-O-N. Some people may have heard of her. I don't like categorizations. There's this concept of highly sensitive people. Now, while I don't like the term, I call it extrasensory. I wanted to present the research before Tanja and I dive into today's special episode about this vulnerability as power, empath empowerment. Dr. Aron did a research study where she amalgamates cross-interdisciplinary research amongst a lot of prestigious universities and other scholars, and discovers amongst every species, there's 20% that have, let's call them extrasensory or heightened sensitivity, gifts per se, that allows that species to thrive and nature to innovate. What some call evolution, which again, some don't necessarily like that term. It's the expansion or the moving forward of the species. So that's the so what today. Today, we want to invite you into this experiment, shall we say, that Tanja and I are going to talk about perhaps this is the future of the species. Perhaps this is our leap forward. And this is about inviting you. If you're an empath, if you're a sensitive, perhaps we're going to invite you into this experiment, not calling yourself that. And we're going to invite you into a reframe of the construct and seeing it actually as the gift and as the power and as the leader that you are here to be. Tanja, how does that sound so far?
Sounds amazing.
I know it's amazing to you because I know one of your, shall we say, pet peeves, because you're such a loving, peaceful being as a clinician, is that whininess, and it's not, we're not saying anybody's whiny, and I deal with it occasionally too. It's this victim mentality, this victim culture that is so subtle, it's so pervasive, and there are different shades of it. And as they read those questions that Tanja shared with me from a group, you can see it's even how we present the topic. So without further ado, Tanja, where do you want to start? Because I know we talked about overarching things, or do you want me to go a little bit more premise? What do you feel comfortable with, since we're doing a little bit more improvised here?
Exactly. So while you were talking, things were going through my head, obviously.
Good. All right.
And I thought, so I feel like maybe we should go into the victim, the pain, and all those terrible things first, so that then we can show, how we can get out of it.
Okay. Well, I like that.
I'm like going back, and part of it is obviously we're talking about in the first episode. But I was just thinking, exactly in our society, the way we grew up, most of us, we don't even know what is an empath. I mean, I had never heard of it until, like I said, until I went to this Barbara Brennan intro class.
In your 40s, right?
I was 40. Was
Yeah.
I 40? No, I was only
close 30s.
I was only 39. Okay.
39. I apologize. It was later in life, is what you meant.
Exactly. Yeah. But at this time, and I'm gonna be very vulnerable, very honest. I was a total nutcase. I did not know how to handle all the information that was coming towards me. It was driving me crazy. So obviously, I was almost 4 decades. And I can't speak English. I had held it together. Oh yeah, right. I had held it together for so long. The walls around me were so thick, like nothing got in, but also nothing got out. So the suffering stayed within. And it was just, and that's also the reason why I used to faint all the time. I mean, it's because I was not in my body. I wasn't grounded because of. And here comes the thing, because like we said, this journey is very individual. Everybody has their own individual personal trauma. What I experienced, nobody else experienced. What they experienced is not my experience. But as an empath, or if you have compassion, you can feel for them, or you can feel with them. But in the end, we still have to heal our own trauma. So yeah, so when I heard that, whatever, in that workshop, and I got pulled out of the crowd as an example, I'm like, what? And I was already like, if you saw the class picture, we took a class picture at the end, everybody's standing together. I have like this much space on each side, because it is really funny. I have to see if I find that picture somewhere. You can really see like, all right, it's like, okay, this is just all too much. And then I got pulled out as an example. Okay, she's an empath, and I'm like sitting and like, what the heck? So I'm sending a text message back home to, back then, David. I'm like, David, I'm an empath. I do not know what it is, but at least I'm not a psychopath. Because at that point, I thought I was a psychopath. I'm like, okay, this is not normal. First, when I was younger, I always thought everybody feels the same way. I thought everybody is the same, which actually I think is a nice thing, because, I thought everybody is the same. There's nobody different. We are all just humans. And then I just had to figure out, no, people don't even perceive those things. It's like, what the heck is going on? What is going on with me? And then, like what we were saying, those questions. I was sick as a dog. Obviously, we speak about it in the first episode. I was medically compromised. I remember back in Germany, I went to, what was it? Neurologist. And then they said, okay, your brain looks perfect. I'm like, okay, why do I always have headaches, or why am I always sick? Let's just try a migraine pill. So they gave me a migraine pill. I tried it at home. That was the first and the last time I ever had a migraine in my life. So for me, it's like, you cannot give me medication. It's like, I will get what the medication is to prevent. So, that there's already something off.
Let's pause for a
Different.
second. So, because a couple of things. One, so disclaimer that Tanja touches upon for the audience. A lot of this, let's call it this 3-part series, these 3 episodes in sequence. It's not meant to be for everybody listening a one size fits all. As Tanja alluded to very eloquently, this is sharing our subjective experience or our perspective, sometimes as a practitioner, sometimes our own vulnerable healing journeys. So let's start there. So thank you. And then 2, a couple of things from what you shared, Tanja, which is brilliant, right? So thank you for coming from that inspired place. Because when you talk about in the picture that you kept people away from you.
Oh my God, it's just ridiculous looking at that picture.
Right. But it goes to those questions. It goes to this concept that even before we talked for today, there was this notion of everybody talks about I have to shield, I have to protect, because the other side of that is when you open up to new information, that perhaps you have extrasensory gifts, your antenna is more open or receives more data from the field around you. It could be emotional information and added information. It can be overwhelming. And that's what I sense Tanja is starting very brilliantly from her own perspective and sharing, which is why oftentimes we want to keep life out. Yeah. And instead we're keeping ourselves trapped in exactly. a victim perspective about these things. So she touches upon this, right? Episode 2 work. We'll call it episode 2 work. What you called it, Tanja, is feeling and opening fully. Feeling and opening fully, right? So,
right. And for me, if I would look at it from let's say from a clinical, or maybe even a scientific not so, but from that standpoint, it is just, you're so sensitive because your nervous system is overwhelmed. Literally, it's PTSD. PTSD from whatever happened to you, your family, and all your ancestors. So it's PTSD. It is in the nervous system. When I took, obviously I'm trained in a lot of those classes where we really, I've studied neuromanipulation. I've studied like almost every nerve that you can touch and manipulate. It is, why some people say, oh, it's in the fascia or it's in the field. I find a lot of it is in the nervous system. And then just thinking about that, we have 60,000 miles of peripheral nerves in our body. Of course, when you touch your finger, you feel it. That's a nerve. So if you have something in your nervous system, like it can be a physical trauma, like in my case, what I talk about, it was, like the always being off balance. I mean, scoliosis, that's like, it's a biggie. It's like your brain constantly tries to figure out how to stay in balance. You're never grounded. And then the whole world is coming towards you. I mean, it makes for a good practitioner later in life if you know how to, handle it. At this point, I can talk about it like, yeah, thank God. But when I just put myself into this place of how I was, it's just, anyway, so it is in the nervous system, and then, it can be abuse, it can be, emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, whatever happened that really is stuck within your body. And then also the ancestral thing, and just what I shared with you, like my last session 2 weeks ago, that I had worked towards, where I had an awareness of what it is about, but I just couldn't release it out of the physical body. And that's the whole thing. You need to release it out of the physical. So it was a whole psycho-spiritual component, ancestral, my mother, her father, what happened, and me being, of course, growing inside my mother's womb, I'm getting the imprint of her trauma. Maybe my sister got another imprint. I mean, everybody chooses, that's where I'm not God. I don't know who chooses what or how you get it. But I had to release it physically out of my limbic system, out of my brain. And it released something out of my sacrum. And I'm still detoxing out of my tailbone, and it hurts. But it's like so amazing because I'm like, wow, this is just effing amazing.
So that's brilliant.
But again, when we are full, by the time usually when we ask those questions here, the empath, in the empath centers, and back then, 10 years ago, I started Googling for books. There were like 2 books. One from a woman who wrote about, what did she write about? I have those books somewhere, like somewhere where I don't even see them because they didn't help me. One was, it's like, those steps that you have to do this, you have to do that, blah, blah, blah. That's why I get impatient with that topic, because I've seen so many things that don't work. They kind of like just put you more into the victim thing or the wrong. What I find is not a good notion. It's like creating that fear by spiritual teachers or by those people, who claim they can help you. They're creating that fear of like, oh, you have to protect yourself, because that's so from that workshop where I'm like, okay, I'm an empath. Google, not much about it. Well, I'll find some things. It's also when I found human design the first time, but then I put it to the side because I'm like, what is that anyway?
Correct.
And then I got another.
Reject that which is unfamiliar. Keep going. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, or I didn't understand it. And I was just so full. I mean, I kept literally, I would sometimes just be standing in the kitchen crying, and I would be like, I have this guy. It's almost like a guy is sitting on my shoulder who constantly gives me sensations because mine is very physical. So it would be like, ugh, and I couldn't just stop it. But the problem was this wanting to stop it. And I wrote on some other things that we can probably go into.
No, we can get through that. So let's unpack what you're saying here too. So technically, in a sense, what it's about is returning to this original state, right? And what's in the way. So you allude to it very brilliantly. If let's say, let's put Dr. Aron's research aside, because this applies to non-empaths as well. Everybody listening, because everybody has a nervous system. Yes. So usually because there's a trauma epidemic, which we talk about. And in the last episode or one preceding episode, Jennifer Hill, another soul sister, talks brilliantly about stuff that Tanya's alluding to from another perspective, trauma response, as to mental health, as to how we empty, how we break out of fear programming. So there is something to be said about what Tanja is unpacking for us right now, in this sense of that it's about reclaiming this power. And in order to reclaim this power, we have to be honest with ourselves and say, I may be full, like this water. I may have too much in my nervous system. I have to let this out. That's that episode 2 work. You need to really feel into it and really feel it. And I love, again, what we're highlighting, because we talk about it the first episode when you showed up, the second one we did, and then now again, that generational or collective trauma, we're all interconnected, and it's a real thing. Not only does Tanja talk about this bio-spiritual, the mind, not even the mind, the body-soul connection, which involves the mind and the heart, the 4 systems, right? The soul, the mind, the heart, and the body in conjunction. That illness, dis-ease is a byproduct of all this. And all we're really doing is, again, healing, which we talk about, return to your natural state. So if you're overwhelmed, it's because you haven't returned to your natural state. Like Tanya's alluding to, it's because you're full. There's more work to be done. So if you're triggered from the outside, you feel you have to protect yourself. What is it within you haven't seen, and not falling victim or prey to victim consciousness, which inadvertently can be taught with, by people that mean well. It doesn't have to be a predatory spiritual teacher. It could be somebody who accidentally means well, doesn't know the full, hasn't embodied it maybe, or maybe it's they have a piece of the puzzle. And then we inadvertently promulgate. This is what I love about this and why I'm passionate about it. I think it's equal for you, Tanja, is we inadvertently, we've been perpetuating a cycle without knowing it. And it was an accident collectively. Well, you're this way, therefore you need to do this. And it's not only about empaths. Healing is more about what's really going on within. And it's about reclaiming that. Yeah.
Right. And also, I'm not a doctor, so I don't know, but I have, out of my experience, I also think having too many heavy metals and toxins in your body causes a lot of delusion. I swear, that's like, sometimes when people have psychospiritual components and stuff, it's just like your body, your liver, it's usually the liver, gallbladder, those organs like the pancreas, when they're like full and you're like full of toxins, that's another thing. So again, which is very important, that what I feel very important is like having a good doctor to look at your blood. Is there like some old virus that is running havoc? Like, I think Epstein-Barr, which I had, and then when I look at people who, like some of my clients who had it, it's like, all right, what is that thing really doing? Maybe in the future, one person, maybe, someone's going to talk about that, but it's like, it can drive you crazy. That's almost like the parasite thing, because it's like, wow, what does it give access to? It's like really crazy.
Well, it's interesting because you talk about, in a sense, again, it's more common sense if you think about it. It's pollution in the body could equal pollution in the soul. So if you're having a loss of control of your consciousness, it could be that you have lost control of your body. And I do know a great physician that Tanja and I both recommend, Dr. Hass Sadeghi of Beehive of Healing. So we are not physicians. He is. And if you watch this and you go, do you know a great physician? Before you message us, we're going to save you that time. Reach out to Beehive of Healing.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's like, for me, getting well and I've tried so many things. So I've done a lot of things. I still believe everything. Okay, let's be friendly. Everything in its component, I feel like, that was beneficial, while a certain thing of some things is just like, what the heck? But anyway, but I started really, really, really getting well once I started focusing on the physical body, the the injuries, detoxing, changing the diet, detoxing. And again, like I said, when my dog passed away, it was just like, what, 6 weeks ago? And of course, I know the theory. I know our pets, just like our kids, they're here, they ground us, they take on our suffering. And I was like, I could never really tell my dog to retire. And then she was old already. She was like almost 16. When she died, when she passed away, it just took me down into that frequency that I don't really like to float in, while others, like in the spiritual field, think it's cool. It's like, no, it's not cool. That's when you see, like, all of a sudden you hear, oh, this spiritual teacher, oh, he died at 60 something. It's like, yeah, because he wasn't really healthy. He was just mingling probably too much in, that frequency. I personally just do not like that frequency. But anyway, but also just seeing how my physical body, all of a sudden, I couldn't eat certain things anymore. I'm like, wow, that dog was just grounding me. That's why she had the things she had, which I always knew. I mean, even my vet, I had this holistic vet. And sometimes when there was something going on with the dog and she's like, are you sure it's not yours? I'm like, yeah, I know. But because I know. It's like, that's how, even with our pets, or when we get I heard that story before from a chiropractor where the cat was sick, but the cat was just laying on the woman's chest the entire time and she was grieving. So the cat was like making sure, just that's what they are, because our pets are like the ultimate empath. For me, when I treat animals, I feel them so much more intense than I actually feel humans. That's why I'm like, when you treat animals for like clients, like, they really
they don't have any of the blockages, right? In the way of their natural sensitivity.
They don't have the ego.
Their natural state. They're in their natural.
They don't have the ego in the way. That's why for me it's even like both. Because when I treat humans, the bigger the ego, the less the results, I think.
And the medicine of the ego is vulnerability, because you cannot, again, to remind everybody before we keep continuing, because it's, again, why are we talking about this? You can't lead as a leader. And I wrote an article about this about a year and a half ago, and I'm happy that the populace is catching up, especially and unfortunately, because of the current pandemic, that we have to look at new ways, that we have to embrace vulnerability, because vulnerability is the cure-all for the ego. Get the ego out of the way to return to your natural state. Because you can't lead if you're overwhelmed. You can't lead if you're confused. You certainly can't lead if you're in dis-ease, if you're not comfortable in your body, in your skin. That's why we keep talking about this stuff. In case you're watching this and you're not interested in healing and you're interested in leading, they go hand in hand. So back to what you were saying, because it's brilliant. Again, I love the way we flow on this. So you talk about pollution, you talk about detoxing, you talk about animals. Brilliant, because again, like trees, like, we have some of the soul tribe, they talk about going out in nature. Similarly, when you connect to a pet, so I was sad, to hear that you were sad and you were grieving the loss of your dog, your puppy, especially that little one. That's so cute.
Right, I know. It's like, and also just, I think I was also, and again, like I said, I knew the theory, but I was kind of like, then when it's always different experiencing something. That's why I'm also sometimes, when people just study books, read, it's like, that's just mind. You have to experience certain things. But then when I experienced it, I almost felt like a little bit guilty that the little dog had to suffer from my stuff. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I can't eat those things anymore. Damn it.
Well, that's interesting, right? Because even there's a little bit of victim, because you said, oh, I can't because of the dog was taking my stuff.
And then being in that, whoever had a pet, like, like really like this strong connection, it's like the grieving, again, is like it is, you have to grieve, let it out, because if you keep it in, your head will explode eventually. But if you're delving too long in that frequency, that again is like this lower frequency where you're more vulnerable to entities. And that's why I told you the story, because then while I was going through that, and when I put on my therapist hat, of course, I could go and work the next day. I was fine. But when I put on when I was just Tanja, me, the person, I'm like, oh my God. So I will cry, but that will take me also into a frequency where I can be more vulnerable for,
thought form,
psychic energy and other things.
Yeah. Well, let's pause on
So
that,
the
because this is
victim.
interesting, because let me give some context for the audience who may be new to this subject matter, right? And because I like the way you couched it and you framed it. It's this notion of, well, here you are, Hass and Tanja, you're talking about this whole time, feel, everybody feel. And then all of a sudden we're introducing this subtlety, this balance, this modulation of don't brood, don't dwell, don't get stuck, because what we're talking about is it's a balancing act. Is you can't only be intellectualizing. You can't be one of those people that has all this knowledge and hasn't embodied all of it. That's hence the first two of this series. Then you can't also get so embodied, what I'm hearing from you, right? And what I've experienced, because I've had my own bouts during these dark nights where I chose to be the victim and dwell longer mistakenly, innocently and mistakenly, which what you're talking about then keeps you stuck. We can add the component of you're then attracting more density, more dark energy, more thought forms, what have you, entities, parasitic energy.
Yeah.
And so so let's pause here. Let's give it to how would you then, for somebody listening, as you as a practitioner, what's tips can we give? What tips can we give to the audience? How do you balance? How did you balance that? How did you balance the feeling, right? The doing and the being, the feeling and not getting stuck? Because that's a delicate one, especially for people new on this journey, this healing leadership journey, or leadership healing, however you want to look at it. So for you, Tanja,
So
what did you see? Yeah, go ahead.
So what I did, especially like in this example, was like the recent one.
Yeah, the dog. Okay, good.
So many examples throughout my whole life. As always.
Yeah, let's do this one. Yeah, since the last recording, your dog passed. Correct.
Yes. So what I did all the things that were really uncomfortable. Number one, it's just a personal choice. I didn't want to cremate it. I think it's like, yeah, I know that's an old Egyptian thing. Back in Egypt, you know, it was a punishment to be cremated. So it's like, I don't want to cremate my dog, right? But it was another different story about it. So it's like just a karmic thing. But just going to there was like a viewing and then the funeral at the pet cemetery. And I'm like, at home, delving on the victim thing. I'm like, oh, I can't do this because I'm going to cry. But that was always my thing, like crying in front of people. But, you know, I've gotten better. I'm like, no, because I do not want the story to repeat itself. I went. It was perfectly fine. Cried a little bit, and then I was laughing. We were making jokes with the guys who were putting. It was just like not avoiding the pain. Then the other thing. What was the next thing? I can't even remember.
So the first thing. So to recap,
everything that was uncomfortable. I'm like, okay, I have to do it. If I don't do it now, it will show up in my life again at another point. Especially for us as healers or coaches, or like really, if you really have cleaned out. And life is like, that's how I look at it. I call it the game of life. It is cruel and it's funny. Cruel is 3 days after my dog passed, I walked into the doctor's office where I work, and an adult patient came in, and she brought her little chihuahua, which couldn't sit in the car because it was too warm outside. So front desk was already like, oh, Tanja just lost her dog. There's someone coming with a chihuahua. I'm like, oh yeah, you know, meeting the guardian of the threshold, how Rudolf Steiner says it. I'm like, oh yeah, fuck, bitch, universe. All right, the dog came in, nothing. I didn't shed a tear. I just looked at this little cutie thing.
You knew it was a test.
I know it's a test. But when we are in this, like being sick and everything, like I said 10 years ago, there were so many tests. It's just like you can't handle it. It's just too much. So as you have to be patient with yourself. I wasn't like this. I wasn't like this last year. I wasn't like this 2 weeks ago, because then I had another session 2 weeks ago. It is what it is. You just look at it and you have to work through it. It's like ding, one thing at a time, ding, the next one. Now the next test for me is going to be, we made a headstone, and the woman from this pet cemetery is like, all right, I'm going to call you when the headstone arrives in January, and then we're going to place it on the grave. And I'm like thinking to myself, I don't have to, right? And I'm like, no. And I'm telling myself, no, I'm going. Because if I don't do this, it's going to show up another time in my life.
Correct.
That's what it is. So it's like, yeah, it is uncomfortable, but you know what? Get over with it. There's also a whole story connected to something else with like relatives, like humans who in my family whose needs weren't met, which I just looked at like, oh yeah, because the dog, everybody's just an actor in a play. The dog was just playing a part in that whole game.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, once you recognize it, it's like, yeah.
So that's it. So okay. So thank you for that. So here, let's flush it out and extrapolate. So what I'm hearing is you got to do the uncomfortable stuff. You got to get into it. right? You have to push yourself. Talked about Rudolf Steiner and the guardian of the threshold, this notion, this archetype of, we have guardians that test us. Carlos Castaneda talks about this in the, I think it's The Fire Within. So first is go into it, step into it, feel, embody, get into that cauldron we talked about, episode 2 work. Be patient with yourself. And what I see is, it's almost like bowling alley lanes. When you, I don't bowl much. I have in the few times I did. The first time.
I am really good at bowling.
You are good? Oh, well, that doesn't surprise me. You're a Taurus. You have that strategic German Taurus, perfect down the middle. So I wasn't, by my admission, so I had to put those little things up, the little bumpers that prevent you from going into the gutter, to getting stuck in victim mode. And what I like,
the Virgo rising, I either bowl correctly or I don't.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So being able to get it down the middle isn't the goal. You can intend for it. And that's getting into the uncomfortable, being patient, and then catching yourself, because you got to do the work. You got to alchemize, as I call it, in the body. You got to do the embodiment work. The thing is, you got to catch yourself objectively, as Tanja alluded to with this, being at the office, seeing a Chihuahua, reminding her of her recently deceased puppy that she had for a while, and then being like, oh, I can either dwell and be like, woe is me, oh, I lost my puppy, or be like, at some point,
because it's not my puppy.
Yes. Hold on. Let's not rationalize it for the audience, because we're talking about emotions. Okay. For a second, is at what point have I finished processing the emotion in order to step also, because we're not saying neglect your mind, to then step into reason and align the mind and the heart. And that's what I sense you're saying to the audience, it more or less is to balance. And the mind is the bowling lane gutter. Don't go into the gutter and only brood in victim mode, and don't shy away from feeling because you think that you're going to get lost and out of control or overwhelmed. You guys, so it's the balance. It's trying to get it down the middle.
But you know what? And even if you get out of control, that's why everybody should have a practitioner or a doctor or whatever
100%.
that you trust and who can help you. So I have my person that I go to twice a year, which seems to be enough at this point. And then again, I had this experience with one of my clients just last week, where I'm like, oh yeah, now I can share that with her, because that's the whole point. I mean, I think it's also my Pluto first house. I always experience something and I have to share it at least with one person. So of course, not everybody has this. Again, that goes back to what we talked about before. Know yourself. Not everybody, you look at your birth chart, there are very interesting components in there. So of course, not everybody has Pluto in the first house in Virgo.
And that's the esoteric, that's the astrology you're talking about.
But if you have a certain thing, it's like, everything you experience, I have to share it with at least one person. And that's how my whole therapist life has been. I will experience something, and then I will apply it to whoever needs it in their session. That's where the empathy comes from, or the compassion. That's why I know, I mean, I'm not going through the same thing, but I can share it. So that's really like hardcore empathy that I'm experiencing. Everything I'm experiencing it for someone else.
Well, I like that. Okay. Yeah. This is, you read my mind. So this is a natural dovetail to this very important ancillary or parenthetical conversation about boundaries and toxic environments and vampiring and abuse, all of this kind of as a gestalt, because we were asked this before the second episode, and we kind of touched upon it in terms of shifting, and after you shift or you awaken or you heal, how do you relate to people? This is another side of it, is, when you're in and around people that are abusive or toxic or don't know anybody, they don't necessarily have to be abusive. How do we, if you're a hardcore empath, that's how this dovetails, or let's not say you're hardcore, you feel a lot. How do you, from your perspective, if you've ever dealt with clients that have been in this toxic environment and felt they were sensitive and had trouble maneuvering, right? These boundaries, or these, because I don't really believe in boundaries. I had a soul sister recently, I may have told you, that she said it really brilliantly. Boundaries are only here and now. It's a temporary phenomenon. It's not about blocking out.
No, it's not blocking. I'm not a fan of blocking. I'm not even a fan of surrounding yourself with white light, but that might be a generator thing.
So let's talk about that. So how do we maneuver, while sometimes you do have to be careful in these scenarios? So how would you advise somebody in those scenarios, that they're in a toxic environment, abusive relationship, and they're a sensitive, or they're an empath, or they feel a lot?
The good thing about my work is I never advise anybody.
Okay, well, okay. So how do you do it? That's what I'm saying.
No, but I might, but there might be some suggestions.
Exactly. What
There are
suggestions
two
do you have?
things. There's like the two things. Either you withdraw yourself.
And what do you mean by, let's be careful. What do you mean by withdraw yourself? Do you mean withdraw as in disassociate from the feelings?
Oh,
Withdraw? What do you
no,
mean by
withdraw out of the situation. If you're an adult, if you're in an abusive relationship, well, there's number one, there's something within you that attracts that.
Correct.
Obviously.
Let's break it down slowly. Good. Submarine for me. So there's
Right.
something within. Good. What
Something
else?
within.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that you have to stay there to heal it that way. You can.
It's a personal choice. So it's a maneuvering the personal choice.
Reflect on it and see, and I think you should also look at yourself, how you contribute to that.
Well, and that's the third thing. I want you to talk about that. Yeah.
Right, because I used to be a counselor on the, what was it? On the domestic violence hotline. And I'm like, oh my goodness. It's like, yeah, you learn a lot of things about people, which wasn't really my field. But you learn certain things. There's always, there's the victim and the perpetrator, but sometimes certain people, and that may not sound nice, but where you're just like, they're constantly talking. So I can see where sometimes men really flip out because they just can't handle it anymore.
Well, okay, so let's slow down. Let's slow down.
It's never justified to be abusive, but sometimes it's like, but I just think you just need to withdraw yourself. And then you just look at yourself, why am I attracting this? And then you go and look back. So it might have been you've been abused in your childhood, or maybe you have never been abused in your childhood, but your mother has been abused. Or your parents,
generational,
something going on, or who knows? That's those things where it's like.
So let's unpack real quick. So slow and quick at the same time. So holding those paradoxes. So first is you obviously attracted it, which we talk about, your experience in the first seat and then the second episode 2, so to speak, how to do that work, vulnerably and healing. What I liked is the third point, and let's be candid with the audience. Responsibility is, so, well, how did I attract this? Do I need to stay in this or not? Which goes to this third point, is responsibility, the capacity to respond, which oftentimes ties to being the inner child, which is a correlation of the victim. Is maybe you haven't fully grown up. Maybe you were stunted in your growth emotionally or mentally, or you were somehow stunted because of these traumas, because of these CNS overwhelms, or maybe for other life circumstances. And you're in not being an adult in that sense. You're not being individuated. You're not being whole, as Kate Griffiths talks about it, right? So I sensed your third component, which goes to the withdrawal, really, when you do this analysis, because the lawyer in me goes, how do we do it as an analysis? So it's, how
I remember what I'm saying, because I don't ever remember what I'm saying. I just say it now and then it's like.
Yeah, well, that's why this works so well, that ebony and ivory. What was it? The Laurel and Hardy in German? What are we in German? What is it again?
Dick und doof.
Dick and doof. That's why this works. It's the ebony and ivory dance. So feel it. Do the inner work. How did you attract this abuse? What is it here to show you? What's the lesson in it? What's the gift in it? Right? The universe is within, as your quote in that second episode quote, so to speak. And then at the same time, what's my role in it? What's my responsibility in terms of, and this goes back to the start of what we started talking about, is you can say, how do I shield myself? What's wrong with me? Or you can say, what do I do about this? How do I reclaim my power? How do I break this victim cycle that could be, as you alluded to, from this woman, for example, her generational? She inherited it. It's epigenetic. So how do you deal with somebody that they can't physically? So let me throw a curveball for you, if that's okay.
Oh my God, now here you go.
Yeah, well, I haven't thrown too many. Let me throw one real quick. Be patient with me. So what if their emotionally, their physicality is so painful that they can't get into it right away and they can't see that they're being the victim? Have you ever had like a worst case client? Like, let's go into your memory bank and tell me, have you ever had a really bad client that was so sick, so in dis-ease, and so in the child victim, or maybe in victim in general? How did you get them to, because sometimes you're right, every time you need a guide. Sometimes even with a guide, it's hard.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, it's all about, do you want to do your work or do you not?
So how did you maneuver that? Did you ever have a client that didn't want to do the work?
I have some clients like this.
So how do you deal with them? So maybe there's somebody
listening that who they are. It's like, because I'm a psychotherapist, that's
right.
I don't have
It's
to
a delicacy. How do you deal with them in terms of, let's say they come to you. So let me rephrase it a third time. Let's say they come to you. Let's say I come to you. Let's say because you met me and I wasn't resistant, I allowed, right? That goes to this, what we've talked about the other two series. What if I say I want it, right? It's like that reluctant lover. I say yes and I mean no. I say I want it and then I'm really not. I come to your table and my whole body is clenched and you're telling me to relax and I'm like, I can't. I'm relaxing, Tanya. I'm relaxing.
But you see,
Yeah.
that's this thing again where I don't want to get on anybody's nerves, but if you
Yeah.
know yourself, and also that's another thing for the empath. Why 10 years ago when I found that human design, it was significant. I didn't look at it, but then once I looked at it, and I really, when I work, I come from innocence, no agenda. So whatever you ask me, it's like, let's just see what's gonna happen. That's just me. I have clients, and you know what? Some people they get well, but some people it takes long because they are so, there's a resistance within them. I cannot make them let go of their resistance. I cannot make them self-examine if they don't want to. Sometimes I just show them, hey, this would be maybe a good book to read, or what about this? They don't do it, not my problem, because my life is good. That kind of thing. And that might sound arrogant, but it's just like, here's something, you need to really do something. I mean, but again, it's often people who had like traumatic childhoods. Their needs weren't met by their mother. So then they're like just like projecting. Or people, again, a lot of empathic people, and I wrote that down here. I didn't even tell you.
Yeah.
Like just a couple of questions that over the last week or whatever, they just, in the mornings I wake up and stuff pops into my head. And then I just scribble. I'm like, oh yeah, that would be something. No, I can't even read it. Yeah. So the victim thing, right? So I always think people need to also really do a self-check, like on their motives and stuff. So it's like you can ask yourself the question: am I revengeful? Am I dishonest? Am I a hypocrite? And then really observing your life. Where am I? You're just like catching yourself. Do I project my emotions on others? Do I project my stuff on others? Because then it comes, especially for people who are empathic, it's almost like being empathic is like a little punishment to wake you up, like to look at your own behavior. What else? Do you manipulate? So that's like, I probably wrote those down because I was thinking what a couple of people, do you lie? Like that people really just like lying. It's like, I mean, what is, oh, do you know yourself? That would be another question. That is at the end, do you know yourself? It's like those questions. I think if that might sound cheesy and it might sound like church and Bible, but I still believe if you're a good person and if you really do not want like harm someone, and if you can, just look at yourself and then also catch yourself when, oh, now I was dishonest. Or and then just,
Or now I'm brooding, or now I'm sitting in it too
but
much.
also the way you are towards people. It's like, am I responsible? Because we're talking about adults, we're not talking about kids. We're talking about adults. The other thing is like with kids, when children are like really, really empathic, and parents ask me, and I'm like, I have no idea. Honestly, I mean.
Well, there's a lot there, because I feel what you're doing is everything is about energy. So when a client, so thank you. I think you answered it perfectly, because those questions seem to be ways a client can start to self-examine or ask themselves, which helps them also see where are they placing their authority and their power. Are they in their responsibility? Are they coming from claiming their power? I love that. And I feel like the way you're effective, even with me, for example, in which people may have heard from the first episode, because you don't have an agenda, the space is pure. So what you're doing is you're then able to reflect like a mirror back to them, or sometimes not having to say anything. They're left with, or left processing and feeling and sensing, because that's all is in the space, is their stuff, that they then see it and then are able to do that work. Because sometimes our job is to say, look, I have to stand my center here and tell you as a practitioner, because I don't have an agenda. It seems to me like this and this, and it's up to them. And I love what you sent to me. I'm going to read it for the audience. Transmutating energies instead of absorbing them is a skill. Every person, here it says empath, I'll say every person should master.
Yeah.
The key to transmutation, or what I call alchemy, the key to transmutation is being the neutral observer, which you are exemplifying, Tanja, and remaining detached. Don't identify yourself with other people's emotional baggage. Again, one more time without interrupting it. Transmutating energies is, instead of absorbing them, is a skill every person should master. The key to transmutation is being the neutral observer, remaining detached, which means don't identify yourself with other people's emotional baggage, and be in your mastery, be in your power, be in your responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or just popped into my head. That's like years ago. I also, obviously, I've been in the human design experiment for a long time. And then I came across the gene keys, which I like. I like it because you're walking the golden path, but you're walking it by yourself. So you get the book, you get your profile, again, goes by, planets, and then, I Ching and all that stuff. And then you're reflecting. And when I look at my profile and I look through the keys, then you have the shadow frequency. So the shadow. Then of course you have to reach the gift. You have to know your shadow. If you ignore your shadow, and that's another thing, it's ego, because you do not want to look at your shadow. Then you go into the gift, and then if you live the gift, you can eventually reach the Siddhic state, which
is your
maybe
superpower.
just leaving your body, then I don't know.
Right.
But I remember I got the book and I read all the shadows, and I was just laughing the whole time because I recognized myself in each and every shadow.
Correct. And
But
this
that's
is
what other people can't do. Another thing is just be light on yourself. I can go to a grocery store, if something falls off or something embarrassing happens, I can laugh. Others, you will see them like, ooh, and then they don't want to say anything. It's like, where's that coming from?
well, that's be gentle on yourself. Well, before we go there, because this is beautiful, because you're foreshadowing a soul brother who's going to come on to a future episode soon, who loves to talk about the gene keys, Richard.
Oh, he does?
He will. What's that? No. Not the founder of Gene Keys, Richard Rudd, different Richard, who actually,
yeah.
So actually, Richard shared space with Richard Rudd. So before we continue, so people understand, if they're new to this, Gene Keys is a system that was promulgated recently, which has 3 aspects within innate in every one of us. There's DNA. We have potentiality, and Tanja is talking about you have to go into your shadow to unlock your potentiality or your gift or your siddhi, which is very important, because this goes back to the second episode of this series that Tanja and I have been doing about to master yourself. You have to go within. You have to understand yourself. So we're foreshadowing, pardon the pun. Now, before we continue,
the interesting part about it is also that when you walk the golden path, which I've done twice, and I think I took like almost a year to walk it once, because it's not about rushing. It's just about.
And this is processing and doing the modules.
Because you look at your path, you have you have your life's work, you reflect on that, and then you have your emotional. Is that the Venus? The Venus frequency, which I really like. It's like Rudolf Steiner again, Waldorf. You reflect on a key, so like the one every 7 years. So actually in your evolution, how you were when you're 7 years old, how you were when you're 14, 21, and then you reflect on it, and then eventually you reach the pearl, and then you reflect on the pearl, which was really easy for me because my pearl has the same key in each spot. I like it easy.
So you really wanted to teach yourself one lesson, so you kept it. Every lesson was.
Pearl for me is just, pearl is what you want to reach. I'm like, okay, but then reflecting on it was really. I loved it. I mean, just like seeing also how I react in daily life. I would study, I would read one key, whatever. I'm at this moment, you have like companion books, and then just really contemplating, going to work, contemplate on a key for maybe 4 weeks, catching myself when I'm coming from the shadow, seeing myself, oh yeah, now I'm in the gift, because you always go in between. And eventually, and most of my shadow has been reactive, so that's where I'm not really like the victim. Victim is more like what is the other opposite? My English.
So it's good, because you're saying what I was going to read, which is another thing you sent me, which is being the victim and being reactive is kind of like this other quote Tanja had sent me a few days ago, or a couple weeks ago. You can't keep getting mad at people for sucking the life out of you if you keep giving them the straw. And there's a saying in Farsi, which is, I think, actually originally a Turkish saying from this one parable guy, Mullah Nasruddin, which is, if you get on all fours and somebody rides you like a donkey, it's equally your fault, because if you keep giving people the straw, or it takes two to tango, I can give you 50,000 different parables or cliches, which all say the same thing, which is what we've been talking about, which Tanja went really deep into talking about gene keys, which I appreciate because it does beautifully foreshadow and gives people a
I'm so
rabbit
looking
hole.
forward to that episode.
Yeah, well,
Because
and a rabbit hole to go out, because Richard's not going to talk about gene keys per se. It's a rabbit hole for them to also explore. So I appreciate you organically bringing it up to bring this all back home. It goes back to this point that Tanja, you really have hit home brilliantly, which is this notion of we have to see that it's within us. What within
yes,
me
we have to know
attracted
ourselves.
this?
Who
Yeah.
was it? Socrates who said that? Know thyself. If you do not know yourself, you're just a puppet in the wind.
And the healing is important for leading because of now the third and final quote that Tanja sent me, which is Tanja has been flowing for you all. This is a rare treat. She rarely, as she said on the first episode, comes out of what she calls her cave. And for her to share this is golden nuggets. And I appreciate you doing this, Tanja, which is this, is heal so that you can hear what is being said without the filter of your wounds. Dr. Thema. So again, heal so that you can hear what is being said without the filter of your wounds. Let's flip this on its head. I'll say heal so that you can live without living through your pain. And your reality isn't a projection of your wounds. Your reality isn't a projection of your victim state. Your reality isn't, I'm weak, I'm sensitive, there's something wrong with me, therefore I need to change something or block or shield, or no. There's more healing to be done because you're not hearing what is actually being said. You're hearing through the filter of your wounds, through the filter of the victim. And the gene keys say 64 different gene keys. Each one is a flavor of a victim. In other words, to bring this home, the victim has 64 different archetypes, according to Richard Rudd, which means that you may think you've done some work on it. If you're still in this state, there's still perhaps some more work to be done. And it doesn't mean it's forever. It means that, are you in your power or not? If you're not, and you're not hearing the reality without the filter of your wounds, and you're still projecting, manipulating all those questions Tanja brilliantly listed, those are good filters to understand. Am I filtering life? Am I living around life, as we talked about in episode 2? Am I actually living from a place of mastery, from knowing yourself, doing the golden path, the pearl? So I love all this. I love all this. What else do you feel the audience, in terms of rounding this out for everybody? What else do you feel they need to know, hear, sense?
Yeah, I was just thinking.
This may be one of the shortest episodes we ever have done and do.
No, I'm just thinking about if there's any, because obviously I'm sharing what has worked for me.
Correct.
Might not work for everybody, but I still believe it works for everybody.
We're confident, not cocky, everybody. It's a fine line, and we are graceful at it.
I probably got beheaded a couple of times in my past because I would be like the advisor to a king who didn't want to hear what I had to say. Yeah, know yourself. I mean, it's really, and not like just delving in the head, but really, look at I don't think it's the wrong thing just to look at your, your birth chart, look at your human design, because I know for sure when I also attracted people into my life who were not beneficial for me, it came from the not self, not really knowing. And these days, obviously, if if you're cleaning out, sometimes the hit gets even louder. It's like, oh, I get it right away. If I'm like, okay, I'm not really being myself. It's just my ego who wants.
Or I'm in victim. So if not self means you're in victim, to clarify for the audience, to correlate. Yeah.
Or I mean, victim or just transference, like.
Or yes.
Looking from human design, because there's always like the motivation. And I know when I go into transference, because what put me into transference is desire and want, which is kind of like really hard, because I need to always just stay in the now, come from innocence, but I'm also human. Sometimes I want it a certain way.
Am I neutral, or am I attached and identifying?
Exactly.
Correct. It's that, am I neutral? Am I being objective? Am I being the observer? Or am I so caught in it that I'm reacting, and then it's a path, and then you react, boom, 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 boom.
Yeah, and then I can't remember where I found that, but you know how I told you about Paul McCarthy. I really like that guy. He helped me. I think I started working with him even before human design. That's more like when you have the feeling, oh yeah, when those empath books didn't resonate with me, I started reading some light worker books, and I think that's when I came up more with, just explore something else. Like, not everybody is, attracted to like starseed stuff, but those who are, might as well just.
If you want to go further down, so
Oh.
Tanya's leaving you with one last big rabbit hole for now, it feels like, which is Paul McCarthy or McCarthy. It's McCarthy, right? It's not the Beatles singer.
Probably Paul McCartney.
Or you could Google Sirius, Sirius Ascension, or Paul McCarthy. He's based in the UK. And it's interesting, attunement reading work he does. Tanya tipped me off to him. For 2 years, she banged it over my head very subtly. And then finally I got the memo, or I got the intuitive hit. Oh, that's right. You want me to do this. And I can attest to it.
Very neutral.
Very neutral, very objective, and very powerful.
Very objective. No, that's why I can't listen to those videos of like the new people who are like channeling stuff. It's like,
well, let's not get into that for now.
Right. It's like, you just want, because then it pulls you into your frequency again, where you're like, where you're like, oh, what is really going on? So just, do something that can keep you like,
again, neutral, objective, again, for lack of a better description, some synonyms to wrap it up: clarity, purity, centeredness, middle path, down the middle of the bowling lane, to use the analogy that came up.
Well, you can bowl out of the lane every now and then.
Right, because if you go to a guide, if you go to a guide who's a victim and isn't neutral or is attached or is subjective, then you're going to be led down a further path of subjectivity. And the goal of mastery. Yeah, say that again.
Or you might get headaches.
Or you might get a headache, or what Tanya calls a headache. So let me hone this in for us, because I was inspired to read something, and as always happens, I'm in awe of the synchronicity. Tanya said, if you're shielding, and she said something along the lines of, at the beginning, don't quote me, something along the lines of, nothing can get out and nothing can get in if we shield, if we're constantly in this victim in various forms of it. So I was going to read this, and I think that's a very beautiful tee up to this Rumi poem rather. And the actual title of the poem, it's a very long poem called The Turn, Dance in Your Blood, by the poet Rumi. And oftentimes you hear these two stanzas separate. And so I'm not going to read the whole poem because it's several stanzas, few pages of this particular book. What I am going to read is the part that I was inspired to read, and then Tanya emphasized it very synchronistically, didn't know I was going to read it this way, was and allow me to step into the poet mode for the audience. And this is really to hone us into, I feel, an undertone of what we've been talking about the last 3 episodes. I have lived on the lip of insanity, wanting to know the reasons, knocking on every door, every self-help book, every guru, every master, realizing it opens. For I've been knocking from the inside. And then he goes on to say, whoever finds love beneath hurt and grief, right? That's that inner work, disappears into emptiness with 1,000 new disguises, is constantly reborn, death and rebirth, resurrection. Again, beautifully illustrated in, Tanya's story. And this is the kicker. Many of you may have heard this before. And this is where oftentimes you see this stanza alone. Dance when you're broken open. Dance if you've torn the bandage off. Dance in the middle of the fighting. Dance in your blood. And dance when you're perfectly free. So I see this, and I felt inspired to read this for you all as enjoy the process, as Tanya described it earlier. It's cruel and funny at the same time. So dance when you're ripping off the bandage, when you're going through this process. To enter the process and know that if you keep dancing, you'll be, as Rumi says, perfectly free. So Tanya, any parting words for now before we wrap up the new year? Everybody will probably see this before the new year, at the start of the new year of 2021. Any parting words, my dear soul sister, for everybody?
I don't know. You're always asking me those difficult questions.
for the hardcore introvert, I go, be on the spot now with no preparation.
No, I wish everybody who watched these episodes, but who watches your entire series, the Vulnerable Power Show, to get the most out of it, to find little pieces here and there that might help them. Not to, if it's, if you're really at a stage where you're the beginning, where you're really sick, No, it can get better. And, just like I remember when this healer said to me, everything is going to be fine. And I was just thinking, because I was so miserable. But now these days, I'm like, oh, yeah. I even tell people and I look at them, I'm like, I know exactly what they are thinking. They're like, yeah, everybody eventually is going to be fine, even if it's not going to be fine. It just is what it is. But if you know yourself, if you have you don't want to call it boundaries, but, not,
Maneuvering.
and also not getting into other people's business. That's another thing. Projection.
Or manipulation. Don't project and don't absorb either. Yeah.
Yeah. Because that's another thing. It's like, controlling, because that's the other thing. Just real quick, because the nervous system is, we have to control our environment so that we feel safe, because we do not feel safe.
And that goes back to feeling safe by going within, allowing for the healing to happen and unfold, all brilliantly put into episode 2. I certainly feel you'll be back. There'll be more inspired shows with maybe Tanja and other Tanjas. Maybe Tanja will clone herself between now and then. And I will say,
one at work that I'm cloning myself.
What's that?
That's what they want at work. I'm cloning.
They want you to clone you. Everybody wants to clone you. We want 50 Tanjas everywhere. So because you're so magnificent, you're so wise, and I appreciate you sharing yourself and being, bringing the wisdom, bringing the grace that you bring, because you even there, you said it very brilliantly. It's about finding those golden nuggets, going within, and that is really the premise. I'll wrap up how we usually start. The 4 reasons I was inspired to bring forth this show, hold this space, is to show you the inner workings of transformation. Here are these 3 parts, this special series. We showed you how to heal and what transformative healing looks like, giving you that insight into the process to inspire you, give you hope, as Tanja alluded to, that it does get better. There is light at the proverbial end of the tunnel. And lastly, going into vulnerability. Vulnerability is power. Being an empath is powerful. And there is power in vulnerability. There is strength in sensitivity. We thank you for watching this special series, this particular episode. If you haven't seen the other 2, you're new to the series, go back, click through the channel, watch them. Thank you again, Tanja. I appreciate you. Tremendous blessings. Thank you all for being here for another edition of the Vulnerable Power Show, where we take a deep dive into the heart of vulnerable, healed, wise, and German leadership, Tanja Seagraves, or Seabreeze in this instance. Thank you all and have a blessed day.
All right. Thank you.